All right. So, you know those spy movies, the ones where like a simple briefcase ends up being the key to like unimaginable power?
Yeah, definitely.
That's kind of the feeling I get when looking into this whole thing with electoral bonds in India. Like, just imagine it, right? It's 2017, big announcements. The government's basically saying this is like a total game changer, like the ultimate transparency move for political funding.
Right.
And, it sounds pretty good on the surface, right? But let's actually unpack what really happened here.
Yeah, I think the fascinating thing from the start is this idea of, you could almost call it like transparent secrecy. The government rolls out these bonds in 2017, and they're claiming it's going to clean up political donations, make everything super clear.
Right.
But here's the thing. Every single bond had this secret alphanumeric code attached to it.
Okay, interesting.
And this code, basically, it let the government, and maybe even the political parties themselves, actually track who the donors were.
Right.
So on the one hand, you have this whole public narrative about being open and honest.
Right.
But then behind the scenes, there's this hidden tracking system. It's like the transparency only went so far.
It's like they're talking about sunshine, but like casting a really long shadow at the same time.
Exactly.
And this obviously raised red flags right away because like by September 2017, the Association for Democratic Reforms, the ADR, they'd already gone ahead and filed a petition with the Supreme Court.
Wow.
And their argument was really straightforward. These bonds weren't actually clarifying anything. If anything, they were making the whole world of political finance even more confusing.
More opaque.
Yeah, totally. But I think what's really striking is how little attention this actually got at the time. Like, seriously, think back to 2017. You probably remember way more about, like, whatever celebrity gossip was happening than this massive change to how political parties could get funding.
Yeah. It is kind of strange when you think about it that way. Like, this was a huge legal challenge directly questioning the very idea behind this scheme that was supposed to revolutionize political funding. But, like, barely anyone was talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
It makes you think about, like, what kind of information actually breaks through and what gets totally ignored, even when it's, super important for democracy.
Totally. And it wasn't just, like, the public or the media who were quiet. Most of the political parties themselves, the ones actually affected by this new system, they were pretty quiet too. It's actually kind of eerie looking back.
Like a weird calm before the storm kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. But there were a couple of exceptions, right? Like the CPIM with Sitaram Yechuri, they actually went and filed their own petition with the Supreme Court in January 2018.
Oh, interesting.
And they didn't just raise concerns, they actually took like real legal action. And here's the thing that I think really stands out. They were the only political party that flat out refused to take any donations through these electoral bonds. To me, that says a lot about their principles on this issue.
It's a pretty powerful statement. Because, like, if you look at the whole political scene at the time, the CPIM's actions, challenging things legally and refusing to participate, it kind of offers a counter-narrative to what the government was saying.
Yeah.
It suggests that right from the beginning, there were people who had some really serious doubts about the whole structure of these bonds.
Yeah, I think you're right. Okay, so we have these early warning signs, this legal challenge is happening, but, like, the government just keeps on going.
Yeah.
March 2018, State Bank of India, they start selling these bonds.
Wow.
And remember, the Supreme Court's still hearing the case at this point. It almost felt like a deliberate move to just implement this scheme no matter what.
A real show of, like, commitment, almost. I guess what's really interesting, though, is that the whole detail about the alphanumeric code, the thing that actually let them track donations, it wasn't widely known at first.
Yeah, it's not like it was front page news. I mean, it wasn't until some of my own reporting in April 2018 that the public really started to understand that these so-called anonymous bonds actually had this hidden tracking feature.
Huh. That's wild.
You'd think that would have caused more of a stir, right? Like the fact that the anonymity was basically a facade.
Yeah, you'd think so.
Yeah.
Finding out there's this secret way to track donors in a scheme that's supposed to be all about transparency, you'd expect people to be, like, outraged, especially political parties.
Right. But it wasn't quite like that. The reaction, especially from the big opposition parties, was surprisingly quiet.
Huh.
I remember meeting with this senior opposition figure in Delhi around that time, and I laid it all out for him, explained how these bonds weren't truly anonymous.
Yeah.
He listened, took notes, seemed to get it, even promised to, look into it further, and then thought nothing. It was really, really strange.
Yeah. Wow. So it wasn't just, like, a lack of awareness, it sounds like. There was a conscious choice to not really do anything about it.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, why weren't they more concerned about this?
Yeah, exactly. And that leads us to a pretty uncomfortable realization, right? If the donors themselves didn't care that their contributions could be traced, even though the whole point was supposed to be anonymity, it kind of tells you that these weren't just regular people making small donations. We're talking about serious money here, the kind of money that can buy influence.
Yeah, the source material is pretty clear about that. These were likely billionaires, big corporations, funding parties with the expectation of getting something back.
Political favors is what they call it.
Right, exactly. And that's a huge problem. It means the government can see who's funding who, but the public's in the dark. That creates a perfect opportunity for, quid pro quo situations.
Basically, an exchange of favors.
Exactly. And the fact that the donors didn't seem to mind being tracked, it just reinforces the idea that this wasn't about grassroots support. This was about powerful people trying to get more power.
Fortunately, there were some people who weren't willing to let this happen quietly. Like, we really owe a lot to transparency activists like Commodore Lokesh Batra, retired, and Anjali Pardwaj. These weren't like big political figures, but they knew how important government accountability was. And their main weapon, the Right to Information Act, the RTI.
Yeah, they used that really effectively. I mean, they basically bombarded institutions like the Reserve Bank of India and the State Bank of India with super specific RTI applications. And that's how they managed to uncover all these documents and data that show how the system actually worked and all its problems.
And what they found was pretty shocking. Like, one of the biggest bombshells was that the Election Commission itself, the institution in charge of fair elections, had been against the whole scheme from the start. Yeah, apparently almost every bureaucrat involved in the early discussions had raised concerns about how this could lead to secrecy and misuse.
It's wild, right? The people whose job it is to make sure elections are fair were saying this was a bad idea, and they were just ignored.
Wow, that's like a huge red flag right there. It makes you wonder, why were they so determined to push this through even with all these warnings? What was so important about this scheme?
Right. And then we get into the details of the bonds themselves. One RTI revealed that almost all of them, like 99.9%, were in denominations of either 10 lakh or 1 crore.
That's not exactly small change.
No, it's not. This wasn't about regular people chipping in a few rupees. This was clearly designed for big corporate donations. The idea that this was supposed to level the playing field is just laughable at this point.
Yeah, it's pretty clear that this was a system designed to benefit those who are already wealthy and powerful. It's like the opposite of leveling the playing field. Yeah, it's more like tilting it even further. And here's another detail that's just mind-boggling. It cost 14 crore to print these bonds. And guess where that money came from? Taxpayers.
Oh, wow.
So public money was used to fund a system that mostly benefited corporations and let them secretly fund political parties. The irony is just too much.
It's incredibly frustrating, right?
Yeah.
You're basically paying for a system that undermines transparency and gives even more power to those who already have it.
Exactly. So fast forward a few years through all the legal battles and, honestly, a pretty quiet public debate, and we finally get to February 2024. The Supreme Court makes its decision. They strike down the entire electoral bond scheme, and their reasoning is really powerful. They basically said it created a system that was perfect for quid pro quo deals and made it easier for, black money to flow into politics.
So they basically confirmed what a lot of people had been saying all along. It's vindicating in a way, but also kind of scary that it took this long.
Yeah, totally. And by the time this verdict came out, the data was already pretty clear about who was winning in this system. The source material says that in just 2017-18, the BJP received a whopping 95% of all donations made through these bonds. It just completely destroys any argument that this was about fairness.
Yeah, it's hard to see it as anything other than a huge advantage for the ruling party.
So the Supreme Court also told all political parties to submit details about their bond donations to the Election Commission by May 30th, 2019. It was like a step towards accountability, even though it was pretty late.
Yeah, at least it created a record, even if it wasn't public.
Right. And then we get to this other fascinating and honestly pretty concerning piece of information uncovered by Commodore Batra through another RTI. Apparently, 105 political parties submitted those reports.
105, that seems like a lot.
Right. And here's where it gets really interesting. To be eligible for these bonds, a party had to have gotten at least 1% of the votes in the last Lok Sabha or state assembly election. So how did 105 parties meet that requirement?
Yeah, that doesn't add up. It makes you wonder if some of these were, legitimate parties or just shell organizations created to funnel money through this system.
Exactly. It opens up a whole new set of questions. And to get to the bottom of it, the source mentions that there was this collaboration with the Reporters Collective and journalists Srijaresh Jalahal and Samesh Cha. They started digging into these numbers, trying to figure out who these 105 parties actually were. Sounds like they found even more layers to this whole story.
It just goes to show that there's always more to uncover. And it's so important to have journalists and researchers who are willing to dig deep and ask tough questions.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the whole electoral bonds saga, what do you think are the biggest takeaways?
Well, a few things really stand out.
Yeah.
First, even though it was presented as a transparency measure, the electoral bonds scheme basically legalized secret political funding. The public was kept completely in the dark about who was donating and how much.
Yeah, that's a big one. And second, it became clear that corporations had way too much power in this system. They could basically influence politics with their money, and no one knew about it.
And third, the fact that the big donors didn't care about being tracked, it just shows how confident they were in their influence. They knew they could get what they wanted, even if the government knew who they were.
And finally, we have to acknowledge the crucial role of activists and journalists in challenging this whole scheme. They were the ones who brought it to light and made people pay attention.
Yeah, they were up against a lot, but they kept pushing. It's a reminder that we need to be vigilant and hold those in power accountable.
So for you, dear listener, the takeaway is this. Whenever you hear the government talking about transparency, be skeptical, dig deeper, look past the surface, and ask yourself, who's really benefiting from this? Because as the story of electoral bonds shows, the biggest secrets are often hidden in plain sight, disguised as progress.
It leaves us with one final, really important thought. If a system that could potentially enable hidden deals and favor trading could exist for years under the banner of transparency, what other mechanisms might be shaping our elections without us even knowing? It's something we all need to think about as we fight for fair and transparent democracy.